You know, spy
Good morning,
color.
everybody.
So that's what
We're convening the community of our
Well, it's just like the salad.
20 seconds.
It is 9 o'clock. And we're starting with moral character open. So, Jim.
Thank you. So there's not a whole lot on moral character open. The really point, I guess, is the proposed goals for 2017, 2018. And there really hasn't changed in the goals. Our second goal was to have the LAP program in March, but we had it in January, so that's a good thing. And I think through discussion with other people, we may want to have a second lab program, at least within our subcommittee, so we're working on that. The other things I'm thinking about with the goals is to add perhaps a introduction program for new members for next year.
Oh,
You can't hear me. Okay, sorry about that. I should watch you. So setting up a kind of pamphlet for new members next year, we're going to come in maybe to know what to look for and maybe standardize the committee's training. So we're going to work on that, but that's not ready to be added to the goals yet. So that's all I have.
Great. Since the next item is not scheduled until 10, we're going to go back to open on Amy's section.
And Eric, some of us are having some technical problems.
Yeah.
A little slow.
Okay.
We can't get to the agenda.
Oh, you can't, all right.
And also the hearing problems.
Okay.
So if you can pull that towards you just a little bit more, that would be really helpful.
I'm just,
Some of us are getting older every day here.
I was worried about blowing out people's ears, so.
You're not the only one to watch.
I must have had a year on this yesterday.
No, she's not.
Okay, Benjamin.
No.
Mine is fine.
Because I did that and it's not much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ready?
Yeah, try it when we're doing that.
Is that okay?
Hold on. Oh, success.
So when you, okay, yes.
Website just went down for a second.
But yesterday was,
Yeah, thank you.
had to go through a whole.
Yeah, so thank you.
Success, thank you. Thanks, Jerry. We can do all
Check if your cap locks are on. If you're having trouble logging in the first time, try checking the cap lock.
This happened yesterday too.
If you're still having challenges, please raise your hand and I'll come by.
Larry.
Oh, were you ready?
Oh.
I didn't like the specialist. The beer was fine. What did you eat? It's not basically Italian stuff. Wasn't a peculiar
There's a ton of restaurants downtown LA now. It's really hard to.
Okay, so we're gonna get started. Is everybody logged on, okay? We have the computer things taken care of? So before we move back to the open agenda item, which is under the item 2, report from interim director, or on item 5, the update on pending Office of Admissions activities, I do want to talk about the issue that we had with being able to ratify our recommendations that were made at subcommittees yesterday and today. The way we're going to address this is on Monday, tomorrow, or 2 days from now, I will be sending 3 separate options for us to have a phone call meeting that we will schedule with a 10-day notice so that we are able to ratify our items. Okay.
All of the items?
What was that?
All of the items?
Yes.
Or
All of the
just gonna
items
pick certain
coming
ones,
from
or-
subcommittees. Anything that needed ratification. Yes, Larry?
And for that, you only need a quorum, quorum, right?
Yes, we do. It would be as if we were having a CDE.
How many people is a quorum?
Can you talk into the microphone?
How many people is a quorum?
It's majority, so if we have 18 members, we need at least 9. Right? Or no, yeah, 10. Yes.
Are you going to be doing a bond amendment or going through the whole thing?
Well, we have to do a motion to see if there's any objection to going through the roll call.
Right.
So
That'll make, well, I'm just saying, it'll make your call much difficult.
that jargon cannot be used.
You don't call it the bond amendment,
Yeah.
it still, it ends up being consent
Yes.
calendar. It's done all the
Essentially,
time.
yes, if everybody agrees. then yes. Yes, Patty, you have a question?
I have a question about procedure yesterday when we had Dean Barbieri, and there was a motion.
Yes.
The motion
I
wasn't.
can't hear you, I'm sorry.
The motion wasn't, we didn't do anything with the motion, it wasn't, but we tabled it for another day.
Yes.
Don't you have to make either agree or disagree with the motion before you go on and make a new motion to table it? That's just a question. I
Oh,
don't
yeah,
know.
so probably during our, so the question is, yesterday for the item related to Dean Barbieri's request for moving to opening an office in San Jose. The issue was, it was tabled because we needed to gather more information. So the question is, do we have to agree or disagree, right, in order to table it? And I think that's what we'll cover during the call, we would need to ratify that, right? So that will take place during the CDE call.
Yeah, because sorry, I thought it was my understanding if there's a motion on the table, you either have to vote to deny and then make a new motion and table it. I didn't know.
No, she's right.
There was no second to the motion.
There was this,
There was no-
the first
yeah.
motion that was made Was there a second to it? Because if there was,
If I recall correctly, no one even made that motion.
No.
Let's second that motion, so that was it. So-
oh, okay,
Yeah,
exactly.
but there was a proposed motion, but
Yes.
not by member of the
Okay.
committee, so, exactly.
Okay.
Can I also just add with regard to the teleconference meeting that Amy is going to plan? When we have a telephone conference meeting, every place that a member is calling from has to be open to the public and ADA accessible. The number that you're calling from is going to be listed. So there's a few ways we can do this, and if you could kind of think about what works best for you, maybe you can also put that in this email. For example, in San Francisco, we can do it out of our conference room. So if you're local to San Francisco, you can come there and that would be fine. We might be able to do it also in LA, which is one option. Another option is you could go someplace public, like a Starbucks, and call from there. Or if you have an office and you're comfortable, having your conference room available. It's just part of the Bagley Key notice requirements, and so I just want to make sure that you're thinking about that.
Do we need to list our telephone numbers?
I think
I think
it
so.
does. Yeah.
Yes.
No, there's a call-in number for the public. We may have to think about this a little more because the public should also be able to call. Well, I guess they could be excluded from calling in for the meeting, but they need a public place to go. So, but I don't know that we have to list our telephone numbers.
We'll look it up and confirm it.
Because that's another policy. If you're taking your cell phone, you're going to put it on speaker at some location, that's not a number you can do.
well, I don't suggest any member here give their cell phone number out for any reason. We have folks who love to have, direct contact to this group. So I know it's rare, but I do know of a telephone booth. So we just put that address on there. We all get in there.
Yes.
Two questions. One, getting back to a quorum. So 10 is a quorum. So does that mean motions need 6 votes to pass at that meeting? Or do you need 9 votes? Or 10 votes?
Yeah, you need 10 votes.
You need 10 votes. So in other words, everything at that meeting would have to, if only 10 people showed up, all 10 would have to, it would have to be unanimous vote for anything to pass? Or is it a majority of the people that are on the call?
It's majority of the people that are on.
So it would be 6 votes. Like, if you had 10 people, 6 votes would, okay. And then the other question is, you mentioned ADA compliant. So if somebody's got an office, that's home-based, my house is not ADA compliant, that means I could not use my office to call in from?
Correct.
That sucks. Okay.
All right, so more to come on that. The other item, the other activity I wanted to talk about is an update of what happened at the Board of Trustees meeting last week related to admissions. I think one of them I already mentioned, and that is that the rule 3.44 was modified. That statute, again, allows bar applicants and law students to participate in LAP. That went into effect, James?
The rule was conforming to what the statutory change was. The statute went into effect January 1st. So yes.
Okay. Another item is related to credit card surcharges. So as you may be aware, every transaction that occurs that uses a credit card incurs a 2% fee. And historically, the State Bar for admissions, we've been incurring that cost. At the meeting, a vote was taken to reverse that charge, so that now applicants are going to incur that 2% charge. Other parts of the agency have already started that in 2017. So admissions is now going to place that surcharge on applicants. The other thing about that credit card surcharge, we also are offering another option, an alternative that does not incur charges,
And you can use this system called CHP or CPH that will not incur charges if you wish to use, to pay online. It uses checks and electronic checks so that you would not incur a credit card fee. And that is starting most likely at the beginning of March.
You're referring to ACH?
ACH, there we go. Thank you.
Amy?
Yes.
So, not for all, but we're looking at a pretty significant group that's going to have a 2% increase. This is an example of what I would like to bring to this body before that happens. I get the reasoning for it. I understand all of that. We're going to get a 2% increase on applicants, and a number of them, for whatever reason. This committee needs to know about that. So in the future, if you can bring that to this body, that would be great.
All right, so the next item is about the mindset intervention. At the Board of Trustees meeting, the board approved participation in the initiative, and an MOU is being developed right now.
You may all remember the presentation that the researchers gave us on the productive mindset intervention. It's research that they have done previously in a number of different colleges and also even in grammar school. And the concept is that you can participate in an intervention, and it gives you skills that help you feel more, you have more of a sense of belonging. And the research that they've already done has shown that those who participate have better results in their GPAs or examination results. And so the State Bar has agreed to collaborate with them on the July 2018 exam. When students apply for the exam, they will be given an option to participate in the intervention. If they choose to participate in the intervention, there is a control group that gets some assistance, some learning assistance, and then there's the intervention group that gets the videos and the whole developed program that is supposed to help with getting the productive mindset. So the State Bar, because of, so what the researchers do is they ask those participating a series of questions to figure out their stress level before they take the bar exam. And then they also have some background demographics. They need to match that information with the bar scores so that they can then see what kind of improvement, if any, was because of the intervention compared to the control group. Because the bar scores is confidential data, what we're going to do is do the research and the matching in-house. And so that there will be no personal identifiable information in the hands of the outside researchers. And that's pretty much what the MOU is about. It hasn't been signed yet, but it's just been sent. It was approved by the Board of Trustees and it was sent to the researchers, and the terms have previously been discussed and agreed to. So the first thing that's going to happen is us setting up our webpage to provide for the link to the intervention. Starting in March, the researchers will begin, I believe, making the intervention available at that point. And this is for the July bar. After the results come out, Ron P. from the State Bar will be working with the researchers who designed the program to match the data and do the various statistical analysis to find out the results and whether or not this helps. The idea is, if it is something that shows significant improvement for those who take it, that the law schools can then offer to their students.
I would add, once again, we're utilizing admissions data. We're working with both the schools and others. And while we've had a presentation on this, I think it's premature for the board to take a position on this before it's gone through this committee. We have a duty, I know, the speaker and my appointee wants me to look at these issues because it's having an impact on students, for better or for worse. I think that agreement should go through this body, and this body should be aware of what's going on well before it's a done deal.
Well, this has been raised at other CBE.
We've had a presentation. That's not a final agreement.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right. So the other activity that we participated in was Admissions Discipline Day. And I referenced this yesterday. This was an orientation that was for Board of Trustees. Typically, this was done with the discipline portion of the State Bar. Admissions was invited, and we had a wonderful presentation by our program directors, program managers. It was a 2-hour presentation. At some point, I think I can share the slides. It will be on our website as well as the webcast. We were the first group to participate from 9 to 11 a.m. on that first day. If you want to take a look at the webcast, we would be the first group that presented that morning. This again happened on last Thursday, January 24th. If you want to watch that webcast. The feedback that we got, people were really impressed by how we organized the presentation as well as how we demonstrated the functions that are carried out by our office. The other item that we participated in is an Ask to Justice panel. It was a strategic planning session that looked at methods and way that looking at our special admissions rules with an eye for increasing the amount of pro bono work around availability around the state. And so the two areas of interest were the registered in-house counsel and registered legal services attorney to look at how we can modify those rules to provide more attorneys around the state that can provide support to indigent families and indigent communities. And so we are adding that to our regular review that we've been conducting with Board of Trustees on our rules reviews. And that's what happened at the Board of Trustees. The last item that I want to talk about is the Admissions Information Management System. As you may be aware, yes?
Before we get to that, I just wanted to make sure that the 2% was
Yes. The 2% credit cards for that? Yes.
And it wasn't the percentage that was ratified, it was that the cost can be defrayed. It will be about 2%.
Yeah, but in the future.
All right, so now, this is a presentation that the board heard last week on the admissions information system. And this is a very short presentation, but it gives you the background of how a decision was made and how we got to the vendor selection that we were at. So just for historical perspective, a report was called for back in 2005 and 2006 that looked at admissions with an eye for recommendations on how to create a case information management system. That led to an RFP that we did not move forward with. So 2015 and 16, Birdie and Associates created a very lengthy document that detailed our workflows, and that was a very critical document that was used for the RFP that went out in 2017 or 2016, and it The document still stands now as pretty much a blueprint of what we needed in terms of requirements, technical requirements for admissions to function. That document led to the issuance of the RFP. It was issued in February of last year, and in January of this year, so it's about a 9-month process or 11-month process, we've been able to achieve a vendor selection. That process led to 5 proposals that came through. So looking at this chart, it moves from the top to the bottom. So as you can see, there are 5 names going across for TIBA, Slalom, Servio, ILG, and Blue City. The ones in blue are Salesforce Salesforce vendors that issued proposals to us, and ILG is a commercial off-the-shelf product that has an admissions is an admissions tool. During the first round of review, that looked at both the responsiveness, the ability to meet our cost and technical needs and legal terms, 2 of the proposals fell out, and so we ended up with the remaining 3, Slalom, Servio, and ILG. From that point on, we've had proposal evaluation, full day demonstrations. We did reference checks for each of those vendors, and then continued with best and final offer process. This is a dialogue with each of the agencies to ensure that they can meet our technical needs and financial limitations. We participated in the Office of Admissions with IT and Oriya on producing scores for each of those evaluations. At the end of that, we ended up with the final two candidates, that's Slalom and ILG. Back in December, we had stakeholder demonstrations, and Alex participated in that for representing the CBE. We also had participation from the California Board of Legal Specialization. 2 members from that committee come, as well as the Board of Trustees representation. Again, another scoring process happened there with IT and finance, and finally Slalom was selected for this contract.
I thought that the vendors were going to come before the CBE.
They did.
I mean, the whole committee, the 2 vendors were supposed to come before the whole CBE, and the CBE would vote which one of the 2.
So back in December, Gail and we all sent out, we had a conversation about getting representation, someone from the committee to come, because we couldn't do the full committee. Yes, so Alex came.
So let me just add that to it. So Gail asked me to attend this meeting, and from the get-go, I had a lot of pointed questions, because literally how the attendees favored one software over another. It wasn't even a balanced consideration. It was the moment when you stepped in, I just felt like I was fighting the man with everyone, because everyone had this subjective basis about which program is better than another program, or a vendor, excuse me. So I wasn't very happy. So a lot of my questions were geared towards, okay, in terms of the cost, what would that cost cover? And it was very clear from the get-go that the quote-unquote inferior vendor actually provides a lot more and charges less. But the IT department and everyone else seems to have this thing about Salesforce, because ILG is a quote-unquote platinum sponsor, a platinum vendor of Salesforce. But they charge $2 million more than the other vendor, which charges less. Granted, that company is a startup, but they provide everything under the sun. No matter what costs you have that you can't foresee, that money covers everything. So it sounds like it's all in one package, but somehow, again, everyone in that meeting seemed to favor one. It wasn't even a discussion. It was a matter of, at least from my perspective, for our committee's consideration, is it wasn't even a discussion. It was just a matter of a presentation, and then we already know which one we were going to choose from the get-go. That was the feeling that I got as soon as I stepped out of that meeting.
See, that's disconcerting. And
It was very concerning to me because even Gail and I spoke at length about why would we be here if it seemed to be so determined that ILG was going to be the vendor. And in fact, not just the IT department, but various members of the office, not Gail or not Amy, but everyone else seemed to really have this choice in their head. And so when I came into the meeting, when I started pointing questions about why is this not covered by this vendor, why is this, a better choice, the moment when I asked those questions, I got counter questions about why would we need those things when, yes, you do need it because I know all of these technical issues. But anyway, needless to say, going in, it was a biased decision from the get-go. I don't think it was a balanced discussion. I felt that it was a choice that was already made before the meeting. But putting that aside, I'm sure Amy might have a different sense. I don't think it's an office of mission issue. It's just that the way it was organized, the IT department's power in saying this, because they do have to do a lot of infrastructure related. They have a lot of responsibilities with that, so they certainly have some say in it. But overall, it is what it is.
So I'm going to get through this presentation, but I do want to say one thing though. Alex, you participated. That session was from 9 to 4, and I really appreciate the fact that you took time out of your schedule to come in to the session. Unfortunately, you missed the last part of the section, which was that discussion. So when you participated, you got to see the 2 vendor demonstrations, but you did not stay for the dialogue that happened after, because I think what you're expressing now was expressed at that meeting. People wanted to see ILG step to weigh that out. So you were part of that conversation, which was unfortunate. But I want to get into like the functionality, because I think you're getting to part of the heart of the issue, which is what is it that we would be getting from ILG that we are not getting from Salesforce, or vice versa?
Okay, but I just want to this is why the committee is so upset with the way things have been running. It appears that a decision is already made before it comes to the CBE, or the decision is just made.
And I do want to follow on that. I spoke with Gail afterwards. I caught up every single fact. She and I spoke at length, and she even said it literally was out of our hands because the Board of Trustees literally had the authority, and the IT department, and everyone else literally had already pre-made that decision. It sounded like everything has been pre-made. And again, it is what it is, but I just came to this meeting knowing a lot of these. Had I known, I probably wouldn't even need to attend because it wasn't even a choice that I could make.
So I'm just wondering why CBE wasn't included in it at an earlier stage.
That was a decision that was made at the last meeting. We discussed that we would have representation at this demonstration. So I don't know what's changed.
So you had already thinned it down though to 2 vendors.
First of all, I didn't do it. It was a decision that was made at the group that we would have representation. The demonstration was a broad one. It was for the Board of Trustees. It was CBLS, who was a very big investor in this initiative. So
it was already narrowed down to 2 vendors at the time the demonstration was done.
Yes.
So how come CBE wasn't involved earlier?
I don't know. This happened before I got here. Okay. So let me continue and tell you how this got narrowed down. So we talked about the COTS. Again, this is a commercial off-the-shelf system. That was what was recommended in 2005, 2006. ILG system, once you've once you've analyzed what they presented, it requires about 32% of custom development to meet AIM's requirements. So typically with a COTS, considering that this is an admission system, 100% of it would not need development. In this case, because we are adding legal specialization, it is an area that we cover in admissions, that neither ILG nor Salesforce have that as a product. Lastly, Sloan proposed a Salesforce solution as a platform. In it's designed to be adaptable, modified, and extended, and it's considered state of the art. Now, in this next slide, what this depicts, and I think this gets to the issue of that got weighed in a lot. This depicts each of the admissions areas and the proportion of functionality that each of these systems have. So, for example, let's look at. Let me tell you what the two differences are. There's configuration and development. Configuration refers to the fact that that function can be achieved within that system. Development refers to the fact that more programming will be required to develop that system. So, theoretically, if ILG were to be a commercial off-the-shelf system, what we would see is 100% in the configuration going across. And we don't see that because California is very unique. While ILGs represents their systems represented in other states and other admissions, California is very different and would require a lot of development, as you can see here.
And Alex, is that consistent with what you gathered?
In terms of functionality?
Yes.
To my knowledge, both vendors provide almost similar, if not the same, identical functionalities. Granted, there may be a few things here and there that are different, but overall the structures there, products, operates.
And let me tell you also where these numbers came from. They came directly from the proposals. These are not evaluations.
So, do I have it correct, Alex, that both of these are using Salesforce as the underlying platform?
No, far from it. Slalom uses Salesforce's. In fact, my takeaway is Slalom uses heavily on Salesforce technology. Slalom doesn't have anything proprietary. ILG, however, is a startup that uses everything proprietary. So when you have any issues, that will cover all the cost basis to cover everything from troubleshooting to customer service to feature updates. Whereas Slalom, they charge you just about everything that you might have in terms of issues. And they charge you $2 million more for the same service and product.
We'll get into it. It's not $2 million, but we'll get into
Okay,
it.
yeah, sure.
Okay. So, so as you can see here, that when you compare Slalom and ILG, there is a difference in terms of how much configuration. So from a client perspective, configuration is more efficient, easier to modify or expand, and more secure for future support. On the other hand, on the other end of the spectrum, you have customized development that is more intensive and requires more resources. And essentially what this should demonstrate is that while COTS is, while ILG is considered a COTS product, it still requires some custom development altogether. Okay, so let's get into cost. So our evaluation took into account the 5-year costs for each of these vendors, and that's what's demonstrated here. Slalom is approximately $1.6 million more than ILG, and the difference is entirely due to the first year of implementation, while annual licensing costs are comparable throughout the life of this project. So with either system, what we anticipate in admissions is about a $1.7 million savings between the systems that we have right now, the software systems, and then also the efficiencies that are gained from implementing an AIM system.
So why such a huge gap in implementation there?
That's the cost of licensing and how much the two products cost.
I'm just really unhappy with this choice anyway, so everything I say is probably biased. But again, I'm just looking at the practical side of things, looking at the amounts, Oh, I'm so sorry. I honestly don't have an answer. I think when you look at the big picture in terms of the spending, in terms of the products, literally you have two vendors that literally offer the same thing, except one charges you much more than another vendor.
But they're not the same thing. I mean, that's the first thing. They're not the same thing.
Well, yeah, technically the product is different, but the functionality is the same. I don't think there's any dispute in terms of the functionality that's provided by one vendor versus another vendor, right? They're still having the same fields for applicants to fill in. I mean, literally, what's different is the back end, which is the infrastructure as to how to implement that process.
So let me just finish this presentation and we'll open it up for comments, please. So these are the vendor risks and long-term viability for both ILG and we'll get into Salesforce. So one thing about ILG is that we discovered in our review process is their financial position is weak. The long-term viability is a concern. This is an agency that, or an organization that works out of the country of Turkey. So when we would request any type of technical modification, we would submit that request, it would go overseas, and they would work on it overnight, and we would wait for that response the next day. That's how most of these organizations, that's how all of the organizations, all of the bar jurisdictions that have an ILG system function. The one thing about their financial statements is that they show negative net income, liabilities exceed their assets, and through the financial analysis that we did, that they submitted, they had about $30,000 cash on hand. Their financial statements were not certified by a CPA, and they proposed absorbing any unexpected development costs, which is a benefit, but their ability to do so is questionable. They also had a security breach back in May 2017. The data was not compromised, but their website was intercepted. So security is a concern with ILG. The other item is related to Salesforce. This is their vendor risk and long-term viability. They have a strong financial position, but it's less relevant because we're partnering with Slalom, or contracted with Slalom, and they would, once we were up and running, we would take over as the rest of the Salesforce licensing. We would keep the licensing and take on and be able to manage our own system. So this is a 10-month engagement. As you can see, through the licensing costs, we would just keep our license, but our relationship with Slalom would cease after the implementation, and Salesforce would provide an ongoing support. Again, their financial position is strong, and their security is strong. We would be hosted in a government cloud, so that meets federal security requirements. So they align with either solution can meet our needs here in admissions. The issue is that Salesforce has greater capability of being integrated with other systems, and we need that. We need that because, for example, legal specialization relies on data coming from member services. We integrate some of our information is in the same system right now. The AS400 is a system that's used, and so we need to be, is used by the entire state bar. We need to have the capacity to merge data and interface with the rest of the agency. At least for legal specialization, that's a very heavy requirement. Also, the state bar can leverage with the AIMS platform for future projects, such as the licensing information management system, which will be coming up in the future. So, based on all of these, the decision was made to go with Salesforce. And this is the evaluation team that participated throughout the process of decision-making for this vendor selection.
Except for Alex, because we didn't participate throughout the process.
Alex is up there.
Well, that's what I'm saying. He didn't participate throughout the process. He participated at the end. So, as far as the other stakeholders, when
you know, do you want to go by name? I'm not really sure. Right, and so I walked through what the process was. Let me show you that screen. Here. So your question is who participated in each of these levels, because they were different groups altogether.
Just asking what, of your stakeholders, which groups were included.
So, like I mentioned, so the Board of Trustees, Joanna, Brandon, Alex, Cynthia, and Michael all came to the same meeting.
At the end, when you had narrowed it down to 2.
Yes. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I guess I think that this is largely a staff decision. I remember the meeting when Gail discussed this, and Alex was nice enough to volunteer, but it was very clear that his role would be a peripheral one, and I don't want the responsibility for doing all the work that was done to come to these decisions, and it seems to me like they were very thorough, so I think we should move on. I mean, maybe for the future, if you have ideas, but I think that this is so specific, intensive, and I'm sure there were a million things that were looked at that I do not want to be part of, and I don't know if we want to burden this volunteer group with that. I trust them to make that decision when it comes to choosing vendors to save money on how we run admissions. So I think we should move on.
Dolores?
I agree with Robbie. I would hate to second guess a month long or however many months this process took with staff involved looking at the intricacies of the various pros and cons of the vendors based on very little information. So I think I agree it should be a staff decision. It should be a decision of those people who are going to use the system. We, in this committee, are not going to use the system. We will be the beneficiaries of the information, but we will not have the day-to-day task of working with the system. So it seems to me that I, as a committee member, would not second guess that process. I think beyond that, I think the bigger picture is where is it written whose decision this is to be made? Does it say somewhere that this is a decision that this committee can make, or is it something that, as has happened, is a process that involves staff and board members, et cetera, over a long period of time? So I don't know the answer to that second question.
It's in the rules, and it does, the CBE is, it says, the language is the CBE may set those fees, but it's just the way, at least I feel about it, is we have a fiduciary duty as to the fees that go in, and this is coming from those fees, so.
Well, it's a combination. It's also coming from the CBLS, from the legal specs budget, and it's money that's been earmarked for this. I mean, I think this has been in the works for about 10 years for us to get an information management system. So the other thing I want to say about this too is that the RFP includes the scoring mechanism. So if somebody's really interested in how this process worked out, I would go back and look. The RFP is still on our website to determine how this proposal was evaluated. Because I think that, I hope one of the things you got out of this presentation is the amount of time that was spent really scrutinizing every aspect of both of these vendors, or all 5 vendors, to make sure that they met both our technical requirements and our financial limitations. Go ahead, Paul.
I think one lesson here may be that if we're to be participating in these kind of decisions, we need to do it from the start. So needed to be involved in more parts, more of the steps. Because when we come in at just the end, it looks like we're just being, we've sent a token representative to look at it. No offense, Alex. And that appears to not go over real well. I agree that I think in this case this is more of a staff decision, and I'm based on the evaluation of the two vendors, Alex. I think Salesforce is the better choice because it's more likely to, with a Salesforce-based product, it's more likely to actually come to fruition and be operable. You know, like half of all these projects fail, maybe more than half.
Well,
well, let me finish. So, you know, I'm not uncomfortable with the logic, but it may have been better to not have pretended to consult with us in this case.
Oh, please, first
Go
and then
ahead.
Alex.
A couple things. One, Amy, this is Erica meeting. That's trying to remember that the chair, that, you know, has a role here, and that needs to be said after yesterday and now today. Two, this is a partnership. It has been a partnership forever. A partnership between staff and this committee. I agree when we get to something this far down in the weeds on a technical basis, that staff, as they do with much of what we focus on, we need to trust them to get through a lot of that minutia and bring to us some viable options. That's where I part company with this as I did the last two items. And if folks don't think that they want to deal with this and don't have the time, they need to leave the committee, because we are tasked quite clearly through statute with making sure that we are on top of these issues. This is no different than any of the other issues that we look at. My concern, again, is that we were told that the final two folks would come before this committee. Okay, that obviously didn't happen. The rest of the process, I get it, and I trust staff to move that forward. I've actually conferred with staff who thinks and was turned around and thinks Salesforce is the right choice. I don't know if I would differ with that. All right, I am worried about their where they're at as a company, whether they're stable. There's so many factors that go into this. So, you know, I think we have to, you know, we're going to end up moving forward on this one, but it's one more example of where we need to appropriately bring stuff back to this committee so we can actually be able to make a much more informed decision. And I'm expecting that after this meeting, though we've had promises for many meetings, but I'm expecting after this meeting that that can change.
Alex, you had a point, and we need to.
Sure, yeah, just a closing point. I agree with all my constituents. I will never second guess any decisions made by the office. But one thing I do want to throw out there is there's just not enough information for this committee to make that choice. For example, one thing that is not discussed in the presentation that will definitely influence your decision in terms of the vendor is that ILG is working with 9 different jurisdictions of Office of Admissions, including Texas, whereas Salesforce has not worked with any jurisdictions. They don't have the domain expertise. Whereas ILG has been working with, in fact, the CTO or CEO is actually a former director of Office of Admissions. So with that extra fact, would you consider, at least I would think it would impact on your decision as far as which vendor you would go with. Financial situation is important, but it's not a decisive factor in terms of choosing vendors. Granted, they're in Turkey, but during the information session, they did say they have customer service representatives here in the States that will provide around-the-clock customer service. Now, of course, when you go against a Goliath like Salesforce,
You just don't have that as much resources. But it is not, again, the only factor you consider. Again, it was when I went into the meeting, I just felt that the decision has already been made. It wasn't presented to the committee. It felt that we just didn't really have a say in terms of choosing which vendor. You know, I caught up with Gail afterwards. I was briefed about the choices, the facts, but again, it was an after the fact. That was the problem that I had.
This is a concern that we had, this is a concern that we voiced, is that if you're going to invite CBE, we need to have some sort of input and not just occupy a seat. And I realize this is software, and you know, I agree with you, Paul, but I'm looking at this for the future and future issues like this. I don't want us to be just a one seat. We need to have some input. Alex.
I'll just make a quick comment. So in my time with admissions at UCLA, we did do Salesforce implementation in one area, and we went through the RFP and we looked at different sort of vendors, like sort of discussion here. I don't want to get into the weeds of like sort of the final choice, but one of the big consideration sets that's going forward is that support. I looked at the vendor that's being proposed, and that's sort of like the Salesforce model. They have vendors that are not part of sort of the Salesforce organization, and that's going to be your support. So if you have a lot of sort of custom work that goes forward, the vendors that they do use are great. It's just that a matter of, like we're talking about, what's that going to look like going forward? What's the IT group? Who are they going to be working with? Is the response rate going to be at the appropriate level for we looked at a vendor that was out of Iceland, and sort of some of the same concerns, like the IT group was overseas, they had an office. However, they did sort of work with a few schools, and we just didn't choose for a variety of reasons. But again, I think like you just mentioned, Erica, and some of those things that are ongoing consideration, the group needs to be involved with to kind of see, what is that support, level of support is going to look like, because that will have an impact if there's any sort of custom work and things like that, that obviously the IT group is going to be, have a big voice in that.
Thank you. And Larry.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about the IT part because, who knows? I don't know how this thing works, as long as it works. And, and frankly, we're the client. We're going to be the client for this thing. So if the staff made a bad choice, okay, we'll give them hell. Okay, we'll have that prerogative. But this raised an even more fundamental issue for me. You talked, Erica talked about our fiduciary responsibility. We talked about the partnership. What is our role? Something? No one's ever told me that. What is our role in the governance of this organization? What is our role in our relationship with the people of California, the judicial system? I mean, it's never been clear. So it's like making all this stuff up along the way. I'm not expecting an answer to that now because that could take 2 hours. But I guess what I'm saying is that this decision-making process illustrates the fact that I don't think there is consensus between us, the staff, the board of trustees, this is just from being around for 6 months, on what our role is. And how, is it limited? Is it expansive?
This was a problem coming in, and this was discussed. We did discuss this, and the conclusion was that CBE is supposed to be playing a part in the decision-making process. So that was supposed to be part of making the decision-making process. Here's the decision was made. So.
One thing I want to say is, Larry, you're absolutely right. I think that that discussion has to happen, and it sounds like this Appendix I conversation, the informal conferences, is the opportunity to address that, like to really, give more context and more definition to the role that the CBE plays in some of this decision making. So I just want to make sure that when that informal conference comes up, that everybody participate and bring these issues up in that conversation.
So Eric, on that, can I just say something? And this is something that bugged me today. I was out riding a horse. I took advantage of the fact that moral characters at 9 o'clock, so I had a leisurely run. And this is supposed to be our weekend for planning. And I think what Larry says is absolutely critical. And how do we go forward in terms of planning? When we really haven't, we're probably, for some of us, 2 hours away from when we have to leave. We really haven't done any planning at all. So this agenda throughout has been staff directed, and that's typically true, but normally what happens is a discussion about where we're going as a committee, what our relationship is, what are the big issues that we have to confront, and instead, and I'm going to borrow something from Elise Walton, we've been stuck in minutia on a lot of little things that, forest for trees. I think this issue is not something that's just to be kicked down the corner for whatever somebody thinks an informal conference is. I think that is central to our involvement as volunteers on this committee about what our role is. I mean, obviously my concern has been is that our role has changed without our knowledge, involvement, acquiescence. It's just happened. And I think what Alec has just said today, and of course I apologize for getting at the end of it, is something we all experienced this last year when we were in positions of leadership where all of a sudden we were simply warm seats at the table and they expected our ratification and we weren't involved actively in decision making. Because I think this is an issue of, is our role to oversee admissions? I think that's the critical question. If that has changed, that's the question we really need to see. And I think we have to have a discussion on that instead of being kind of told, well, all the financial things are going to be taken care of. The issue of what our role is going to be kicked down the road. I would have expected that this would have been front and center for these last 3 days. That is the purpose of this planning session. So that's, I don't know if I can say anything else, but I appreciate the comments from the people who have already spoken.
I'm going to jump in. I thoroughly expect at our next meeting, I don't want this to be just an Elise conference call. This is just getting ridiculous. We've had working groups that have worked on this. I am thoroughly comfortable with my knowledge of what our role is, and I'll be sending that out to all the members this afternoon. It is mandated legislatively. That is being changed and usurped by staff at this point on a just regular basis. And all the promises in the world don't seem to have changed much. Just in the last hour, we've had a 2% increase in fees for many of our applicants, which was not brought before this group. We had a final agreement ratified with a research group that is going to have access to admission applicant data without a decision made by this group. And now we have this final one, which will affect our budget and applicants in a significant way. This is not minor. Now, I might agree with all of those actions, but the fact that we were taken out of that process means that there's some protection that's not happening for our applicants and for the state of California. And that's why my butt is in this chair. That's why I volunteer to spend days and days and hours on this to protect the people of California. And we're losing people. And per some emails, we might lose even more because people are getting frustrated that that's not occurring. So someone's got to fix this, so Amy, please take that message. And at our next meeting, because we're right, there was not a lot of planning done. A lot of it was driven in just presentations. And that doesn't need to be, folks, back again for a second on this last point, this is not a conference call with Elise. This is much bigger than that. And we have to get to the bottom of it with the whole group.
Thank you. And it's past 10 o'clock now. Thank you, Reed. It's past 10 o'clock now. I want to stick to the agenda so that we can move on time. And the next item is O&M.
Yes.
So
So do we have our committee? Who's on our committee?
And do we need to step back?
Yeah, and everybody who's not on the O&M subcommittee could sit in the back, please.
And O&M is Karen, Lee Wallace, Paul, James Bolton, Robert Rhodes, and Esther Lynn.
Okay, good. So I think we've got 100% attendance, which is fantastic. So first, good morning, everybody. I'm to the chair of this subcommittee for operations and management. For the audience, is there any public comment on the items that are on agenda for this matter? Don't see anybody standing up. I know how thrilled we are about O&M, but of course we've had a lot of interesting things going on. Second thing, Bagley Keene, boy, yesterday was interesting and trying to figure out how it works. Dusty asked to take a few minutes of time in terms of trying to figure out how we can most effectively do our business in light of Bagley Keene. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to be able to engage in discussion. I know she and I have had some discussions on the best way to do this because we really want all of our committee members to be as actively engaged as possible. So Dusty, you have the floor.
Thank you. And exactly as Karen said, the idea here is to present an option that will allow as many CBE members as possible to participate in the discussions that previously they were able to participate in because we were not under the Bagley Keene rules, and when subcommittees would meet and discuss an item, anybody else who wanted to join basically was able to ask questions and give advice. So one of the ideas that we have is, or that I could suggest, is that we eliminate subcommittees and instead ask either the chair or staff to appoint one or two liaison members of the CBE to each of these special program areas. And that individual could be the one to receive the documentation and present it, as it were, and then allow the entire committee to hear it once and make resolutions and adopt those resolutions. Another issue that came up is with the testing accommodation subcommittee. Testing accommodations currently have a special rule if accommodation requests come in within the last 4 weeks before one of the examinations or during a month when there isn't a committee meeting scheduled. And in that case, the subcommittee is allowed to respond to the accommodation, and then at the next CBE meeting, that accommodation would be ratified. So I would recommend that to allow us to continue to respond rapidly to testing accommodation requests, a similar situation be allowed where perhaps staff could recommend 2 people in the south and 2 people in the north who could handle those requests that come in during the 4-week period before an examination, and then they can be ratified at the next meeting after.
Okay, so those are the comments. I think those are pretty good. Paul, what do you want to say about that?
Okay, yeah, the accommodation appeals always seem to be the sticking point to me because I wonder if the former / current practice of just sending them out and then having people indicate whether or not they disagree with the recommendations and having a meeting of the group only if there's disagreement can be sustained under Bagley Keene. It could if the meeting, what would happen now is it would be a telephonic conference meeting that, as you indicated earlier, they have to do it from a place that's open to the public because you have to have a brief open part to then go into closed session. So it would seem to me the best way to handle that would be to have a video conference between LA and San Francisco. But I'm even wondering if the process of coming to the conclusion that you don't need to have a conference call is not violative of Bagley Keene because people are making a decision by the exchange of emails.
But I think if you have a staff designated two-person working group who are handling these issues, it is exempt from Bagley-Keene. It's not considered a meeting.
Okay, that's good. Lee?
It's a big load for two people. And I, actually, let me back up for a second. Thank you, Desi. I know you were working really hard to try and find an answer to this, and I really appreciate it very much. And I think you're on the right track here. I just want to make sure we don't hit any more landmines along the way. And we've really thought this out. Moral character, also, could be a bit of a problem there on how, and we need to think. Pardon?
That's an exception.
That is
Moral
an-
character.
Well, it can be handled in closed session. It still is subject to notice requirements.
Okay.
So that this doesn't apply.
It doesn't apply also with the work that's done outside of the committee meetings and having a committee and a focus and the others. All of that stuff is, I just want to make sure, is separate. Because that committee does a lot of work outside of our committee meetings.
Right, so the conferences where you have a few members meeting with the applicants, because that is less than the majority of the subcommittee, or if there's no subcommittee, less than the majority of the committee, and they're not making decisions, that is also an exception to the Bagley Keene, or it's not a meeting under the Bagley Keene.
So they would make their recommendation after all of those meetings to one of the two people who are overseeing that area, whatever, I forget what we're calling those two people. And then those two people would present it to the committee?
Yes.
They present it, okay.
It's actually, I'm sorry.
Anyone else, Robbie?
Well, I was going to say, I'd be happy to do that for accommodations for LA.
Well, okay. So we'll talk about that. So here's how I think, and Erica, do you have some comments on this?
Yeah, I think the idea was to make it kind of the way it already is, in that before we come to a meeting, there are people who are assigned to read more than the rest of us are. And those people will then present to us and we'll discuss it and we vote. And essentially that's what's going to happen, is the chair of the committee will appoint two people to read thoroughly all the materials, and then those two people will present it to the entire committee, and the committee can discuss and vote. And this way we don't have to say, oh, well, you're not on the committee, you can't vote. We can have everybody just do the vote at one time. We don't have to worry about the Vaughn amendment.
Yeah, so this is what I'm hearing, and I think both of these ideas that Destiny has are a good way to start it. A couple things I would think that we would do for the liaison on the specific areas, or what has been our subcommittee. I think that at least for this year, I think this is the power of the appointment with the chair. The chair, I would recommend, would appoint each one of the subcommittee chairs to be those liaisons. On specific subject matters, that subcommittee chair, I would have the ability or right, depending on the subject area, to bring in one other committee member for consultation in preparing any report to the committee. I took advantage of Larry Kaplan and read the DCA, all the DCA rules prepared on Bagley-Keene this morning, just to be prepared. That clearly does not violate Bagley-Keene. And that gives us our best chance to have our committee members as engaged in the process without getting us bogged down where we've got to have half the people outside the room. I think that's really critical. On this testing accommodations issue, I think the idea's right, except for I think to have the procedures backwards. I don't think staff should be assigning people. I think that assignment should come from whoever is the person, if it's O&M or whoever it is, whichever subject matter, should have the authority to make that assignment to those two people that are on it. And of course, that's going to depend on scheduling. So if an example comes up, say David or me or somebody that tries a lot of cases is stuck in trial, we would not be the people assigned to do that work at that particular time. We'd make sure that the people that could do it, had the capacity to do it for that, then those two people from the north, those two people from the south would report to the committee as a whole. And I think that's a perfect workaround, at least from my view, that I think accomplishes what we want to do. But I would have it more committee directed as to who's going to do it as opposed to staff directed. I think that's probably the biggest difference that I hear in my reading of the Bagley Keene. I think allows us to do that too. Yeah.
And I still believe, at least from my reading of it, that testing accommodations is afforded the same protection as moral character, because it does say that the committee and state bar staff and others who are reasonably necessary for consideration of a closed session matter may attend the closed session at the discretion of the committee's chair to discuss, deliberate, or take action upon any of the following. And one of those is matters related to the moral character, competence, or physical or mental health of an individual. And I think that testing accommodations fits squarely within that description.
So Erica, that is for closed sessions, and that's correct, but closed sessions still have to be noticed. So if you want to have even more flexibility and be able to do something immediately and not have to provide a 10-day notice that you're having a closed session, if you have the two-person committee, not even a committee, a two-person group, then you don't even have to have a notice requirement.
Well, so I'm talking about when the whole committee meets. As far as the smaller meetings, we already have a small number of people anyway, just actually because that's what we could get. The number of people who participate in informal conferences is very small. So that really wouldn't change either.
So, any other discussion on it? I know that we can't take any action officially as the total committee. Is this up yet for a motion? Because it's not necessarily framed. I don't have I can entertain a motion from our subcommittee on this subject.
That I think don't we want to do that to make way for for Amy's phone?
Right, if you made a motion and adopted the recommendation, then when we have the phone meeting to adopt them, it would be all lined up.
Right, I think that's right. So,
Another quick question, is from the thinking as we apply all this, does this give Mark a whole larger pool which to pull from for your conferences?
I'm assuming that if we go to a committee as a whole, which is I think the concept that we're talking about.
Right.
Then I would assume everybody on the committee would be eligible to participate, in the informal conferences if expanded. So
yeah, and I think that comes with a lot of
that's an advantage.
Advantages, a few slight disadvantages which are easily dealt with, and we've talked about this a little bit. People talked about training, which is important, but that the whole committee get a lot more training in each of these, whether it's accommodations or moral character, because we're all going to be digging a lot further into the weeds than we used to. And maybe there's another one, but I think those are the primary.
okay, so this is the motion that I'm going to see whether somebody's going to give me a motion on. As I understand Dusty's just a recommendation with further discussion that we would dissolve the subcommittees, the 4 subcommittees. We would appoint our current subcommittee chairs as liaisons to take the lead in receiving the information, disseminating the information on the specific subject matters. In the discretion of those liaisons, they would have the authority to bring in one other committee member for discussion and preparation of a report to the committee. And then I think it was the third item is the chair I'll take the chair of our committee of bar examiners, in consultation with the specific people, because it might be O&M, will have the authority to designate 2 people from the north and 2 people from the south on a periodic basis to review testing accommodations to report to the committee as a whole. I think that's the motion I'm looking for.
I don't know, I think that you're still permitted, if you wanted to, for testing accommodations to just appoint 2 people rather than always having to be a participant, but that's up to you, totally up to you.
Yeah, so all I'm thinking about is just, suppose you appoint 2 people and they're in a jam, that's what I'm thinking about. I know sometimes for myself, I know sometimes for David, we're in trial, we're out of pocket. If we've got a deadline when we've got a testing accommodation that's assigned to us, it's much better if we have the ability of discretion. Think, oh, am I responsible for a testing accommodation? I think no. Okay, David. So whoever it is should have the authority to be able to say somebody else can do it. That's all I was looking for, that flexibility. So that's the motion I'm looking for. Subcommittee. Silence.
I have a question. By formally appointing this group for accommodations, does that turn it into a subcommittee that is subject to vacating?
Nobody's formally appointed anybody.
Well, but this is some group that's going to have to meet or to have a meeting of the minds at some point in order for it to have any value.
2 people are assigned for each testing accommodation person. And 2 in the north, 2 in the south. They will, after they've met or conferred by phone most likely, they will then report their recommendations to the committee as a whole.
Okay,
2 does not constitute a committee.
if it's specifically appointed subgroup of the full committee, I think it might.
All they're doing is reviewing specific testing accommodations.
They're not making these decisions.
I'm not trying to be a wet blanket here, but I can tell you that that's the way we work at my agency.
But they should make the recommendations.
Yeah, and the committees I'm thinking of just ultimately make a recommendation to the full commission, but they're still subject to vacating.
Lisa?
Yeah, I was going to say, I have to have decisions. I can't just have recommendations that need to be read. I have them within a certain period of time in order to be able to have those decisions before the exams. So that's my...
Right, so we are delegating the value judgments to 2 or 3 or 4 people. And when they come to us for ratification, they will come to us after the test has occurred. So all we can do is say, we wouldn't have done it that way, don't do that way again. So it's an awkward situation.
I was also going to add, and I don't know if Jesse can weigh in, but Lisa, I'm sorry, okay. The way it was done before is that those decisions that are made by the subcommittee, which the subcommittee has the power to do in between meetings according to the committee policy rule, and then at the next committee meeting, those decisions are confirmed by the full subcommittee, but it's more affirmed in order to have it recorded in the minutes, not necessarily because the subcommittee has the power in between meetings to make the decisions.
Yeah, so your point is we've always effectively delegated to them, and this is no different.
So, Area Code 11121.c defines a state body as an advisory board, advisory commission, advisory committee, advisory subcommittee, or similar multi-member advisory body of the state body if created by formal action of the state body or any member of the state body, and if the advisory body so created consists of 3 or more persons. So that's why we're thinking if it was less than 2, it doesn't fall under the definition of state body. Alternatively, which is why I mentioned that if it was created by staff, it's not considered formally made.
So that's what she's saying, is that the reason for a staff member to do it was so it wouldn't be a formal.
But it doesn't sound like, if I read the code too, as I said, I didn't understand 2 people constituting a quote-unquote committee.
I don't care.
I'm hard pressed to figure out how we're going to be able to do testing accommodations in a meaningful way without being able to do that. It's just impractical to think we've got to wait for get to our 6 meetings a year to do testing accommodations. So, I mean, I'm still inclined to think that the way I've kind of structured the motion, I think makes the most sense. So wait for a motion from the committee, thank you.
Sorry.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Any more discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstention? Okay, motion passes. Okay, thank you. Good work, Desi, I really appreciate that. Now, our next item is Greg is going to talk about the 2017 first-year law students examination cost analysis. I appreciate the report. I noticed we had a few less first-year law students taking the exam, and that reduced some of the cost as well. Is there anything else that you want to talk about?
I think you hit the highlight, Karen. Right. We had about an 8% decline in the number of testers from a year ago in October 2016 compared to October 2017. That did help drive the cost down a little bit to roughly $147,000 in this year compared to about $157,000 last year. As I typically do, I'd like to share a couple of sort of key highlights in terms of some of the metrics that we look at. The first one is that we utilized about 57% of the facility capacity that we contract out. This was a little bit down from about 62% a year ago. As I think most of you know by now, the three sort of largest bucket drivers of the costs are the facility rental, the electrical outlets, and then the proctor expenses. And once again, those made up almost 70% of the total costs. And we had a total of 19 applicants who took the exam this year at a TA facility. And although that represents only about 5% of the total testing population, the cost to administer the exam to those individuals was a little over 40%. So you get the sort of the difference between the two different testing costs between TA centers and standard centers. And then if you break it out in terms of cost to test per applicant, it costs approximately $252 per applicant to test at a standard TA center and almost $3,200 at a TA center.
Yeah, so you made a notation about investigation going into trying to find more cost-effective locations or ways to conduct these tests. Do you have anything new to share with the group?
Well, I don't know how new this is, but I may have shared at the prior meeting that for the upcoming July bar exam, we're actually utilizing a new hotel facility in Ontario, which will be materially cheaper than the facility that we use in Culver City, which is the Doubletree West Side. I was speaking to Robbie earlier today about the fact that in the past we had administered the first year exam at the San Francisco offices. And given the declining number of testers for that particular examination, I think it might be time for us to sort of revisit that. As I had alluded to earlier, there were some challenges to administering the exam in the office setting, but I think nothing that can't be sort of addressed through some coordination with Office of General Services. But I think that's something that we should explore further. And I think specifically for the first year exam, because of the TA population being so strong, I think we could potentially make it work where even in Los Angeles, we could test, obviously based on availability, utilizing the conference center here and getting a little bit creative, because the cost to do that would be zero compared to renting out a hotel facility.
So the other question I had was, is that year to year from 2016 to 2017 decline in first year exam takers, is that a trend likely to continue?
I don't see anything on the horizon that would lead me to believe that that trend is going to reverse. So if you track the bar exam numbers, we've had a slight increase over the past year, we think largely due to the fact that it's the new two-day administration. In fact, for the upcoming bar exam in July, we had actually a record number of applicants. We had a little over 6,000, which is the first time we've seen those numbers. And that continues a trend of the 9,000 plus that took the exam back in July. But for the first year exam, I think easily for the last 2, 3, 4 administrations, we've seen a continuing decline, and I think that will continue.
What's that number again?
Community members have any questions about 0300?
I didn't have that on, but that number is 350. And especially for testing accommodations, do you, and I'll trust you on this one, though I want to see how the heck you're going to do this. You think we can fit in, our current spaces in the buildings? I mean, that would be wonderful, but for testing accommodations, that is so difficult.
I think the biggest potential roadblock for doing testing accommodations administration here in the office is if the numbers end up being different than what we predict, mainly higher than what we predict, that puts us in a little bit of a bind. And in fact, that's what happened during that last first year administration that I talked about that we tested in San Francisco. We had projected X number and it ended up being quite above, not quite above, but above that. So we were scrambling last minute to find space. So if we predicted 7 people and we could plan for that here in Los Angeles, for instance, I think we could pull it off. But if it turns out to be 11, then we have to get creative. So that's sort of the unknown.
And maybe we can, if that is the case, maybe administratively we can try and figure out through the committee some deadlines, so we have those numbers, well in advance. Because you contract out these facilities a couple of years in advance. And so going out, last minute just is very, very difficult. So maybe we could look at our deadlines and, if that's the direction you're going, and put some hard deadlines on there.
So Lisa has a comment.
And I know how hard that is with ADA.
Okay, Lisa has a comment.
No, my comment is that, because of these applicants have disabilities, and we cannot have any different deadlines for them than we have for the general population. In addition, we have TA appeals that are going on that sometimes we don't know the results of what that's going to be, whether we're going to have additional applicants or not until pretty close to the exam.
Good. I think that's good. Anyone else have any other comments about 0300? So I'd entertain a motion that the report on the cost for administering the October 2017 first-year law students examination be received and filed.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstention? Okay, motion passes. 0301, Greg, tell us about what it looks to be a fairly cursory financial report. So, not a lot of detail on that.
So this is the periodic financial report that I provide to the committee at each meeting. So these numbers represent the finances for admissions through the end of November. Obviously, we're in February now, and my understanding is that finance is in the final stages of closing out the numbers for 2017. So I think by the March meeting, we'll have a full reporting of how admissions did for the year 2017. But once again, through the end of November of 2017, we were slightly ahead of budget in terms of our revenue, and for expenses, we were about almost $1 million under budget. So I think both directionally speaking are favorable news. I will say that I think by the time the full 2017 year numbers come out, the gap between the actual and the budgeted expenses will close out a little bit more after all of the expenses have been incorporated. But I think generally speaking, we'll end up fine with respect to the budget.
Good. So did anyone have any questions in 0301? Okay, I don't think that calls for a motion that I can see. So the last part of my agenda is to review our subcommittee goals. And the subcommittee goals for our committee seem to be growing at an exponential rate. So I don't have any intention, unless someone has some definite desire to hear me, to list them all. So does anyone, we certainly are, we talked about law school fees, we did talk about proper salary rates earlier, we did talk about in October admissions training videos. We've been talking about Bagley Keep, we made some more progress on that. We reviewed in December the admissions fund budget. And we still need to work on minimum competence, so I'm hoping that we see something substantive at least to review, maybe it's starting in March, because I think that issue and the definition of public protection, I think necessarily is part of this. Does anyone have any additional goals or any other comments on goals? Okay, I think we're doing okay. Hearing that, none, I think we can adjourn our subcommittee meeting. Thank you very much.
Erica?
Maybe we'll take a short break. We'll take a short break and then we'll figure out who else has to do something else. We're going to take a break.
Okay, so the first time was like 10 minutes. Characters, the goals, right, in the morning. The 10 minutes, the goals.
Well, we already,
So a character, right?
we already Jim presented.
Did you ready, Dave? How many months?
9.5.
6 minute mile?
No, I was taking my time.
I know.